It was just southeast of San Jose, California. Started at 12:58 a.m. in an unincorporated, sort of semi-rural area not far from Silicon Valley near the 101 freeway. 12:58 a.m. Somehow, someone, almost certainly more than one person, opened up the heavy metal cover of an underground vault on the side of the road. It wasn't a normal manhole cover like you see in the street everywhere, the kind of thing you might be able to lift up yourself. It was much bigger than that, heavier than that, which is why investigators think it would have likely taken more than one person to open this thing up. But whoever it was, they opened it up, they got inside that underground vault, and when they were in there, they cut the fiber optic cables that ran through it. Then 9 minutes later, they did it again. A different, nearby, underground vault containing fiber optic cables. They pulled open the doors, got in there, and sliced off the fiber. And the consequences of that were immediate. People all over the area instantly lost cell phone service and landline phone service, and 911 call service went down. Police would ultimately have to tell people in the area that if they were having an emergency and they needed to call 911, they should try to do that from a cell phone. If that didn't work, they should try to do it from a landline. If that didn't work, police advised people in the area, you're going to have to drive to the nearest fire station and ask for help in person because we have no other way for you to reach us. 21 minutes after they cut the second set of fiber optic cables, whoever it was started shooting into that electrical power substation with AK-47 style rifles. Investigators say the shooters fired more than 100 bullets into the electrical substation over a period of about 19 minutes. They were firing carefully enough and with enough well-informed deliberation that in that 19-minute period where they were shooting all those dozens of rounds, they were able to knock out 17 different electrical transformers in that substation, some of them by shooting them directly and some of them by causing them to melt down. Quote, the shooters appear to have aimed at the transformers' oil-filled cooling systems. Riddled with bullet holes, the transformers leaked 52,000 gallons of oil, then overheated. The first bank of them started crashing at 1:45 a.m. So between hitting the oil that was used as a cooling fluid for the transformers and hitting the transformers themselves, with more than 100 rounds of AK-47 rifle fire, 17 transformers were knocked out in that electrical power substation. And with the cutting of the fiber optic cables nearby, cell phone, landline, and 911 service was knocked out. That Northern California attack in 2013, altogether, all those different components of it, it took less than an hour. And by the time the police turned up, the perpetrators were gone. It took 27 days for authorities to make the repairs and get that substation up and running and get that fiber connected again. So again, that took place April 2013 in Northern California. That attack remains unsolved. Nobody ever publicly claimed responsibility. Nobody, as far as we know, was ever arrested. No motive was ever ascribed to whoever carried out that attack. Now, fast forward to this year, February of this year, February 2022, 3 men, one from Ohio, one from Wisconsin, one from Indiana and Texas, pled guilty to a plot to do much the same thing, inspired by white supremacist ideology. Department of Justice press release. 3 men plead guilty to conspiring to provide material support to a plot to attack power grids in the United States. Domestic terrorism plot was in furtherance of white supremacist ideology. And the plea agreement in that case, again, from earlier this year, spells it out. It says in the fall of 2019, 2 young men, one age 20, one age 24, met in an online forum. One suggested to the other that they hatch a plan to take out electrical power substations in various parts of the country, to try to set off civil unrest and to hopefully try to set off a race war in the United States. This is from the plea agreement. Quote, the plan was to attack the substations with powerful rifles that would penetrate the electrical transformers. Members of the group estimated that would cost the government millions of dollars to recover. In addition, the defendants believed that time associated with replacing the substations would cause confusion and unrest for Americans in the region. There were also conversations about how the possibility of the power being out for many months could cause a race war. Additionally, without power across the country, they hoped it could cause the next Great Depression. People wouldn't show up to work, the economy would crash, and there would be a ripe opportunity for potential white leaders to rise up. That plea agreement, unsealed by the government earlier this year, explains how these young men decided they would need to cause a big explosion as a distraction. They wanted to set off some kind of big explosion that would tie up the police and distract police from what they were going to do to the power substations, which is something, again, that they hoped would cause millions of dollars of damage, something that would take months to be able to repair. To set off just the distraction explosion, they admitted to buying bomb components and starting to test explosives to suit that part of their plan. They also obtained multiple so-called ghost guns, guns with no serial numbers, so they couldn't be traced. They built what the government describes as multiple AR-47-style semi-automatic rifles. They built the rifles, they were building more, and they started training with them at firing ranges. When the FBI searched their homes, they found multiple firearms, including firearms with no serial number, multiple silencers, milling tools, weapons modification manuals, explosives production diagrams and manuals, chemicals and components that an FBI lab determined could be used to create an explosive device. Prosecutors said they found, quote, a large amount of Nazi-related material, such as videos, books, and images. Also detailed U.S. power infrastructure information, a list of specific power substations, and, quote, an article regarding the sabotage of a power substation in California. So the California attack on that power substation was in 2013, still unsolved. This year, we get neo-Nazis trying to set off a race war, planning what appears to have been a copycat attack, copying what happened in California. Also, to the extent that they're also planning on using high-powered rifles to shoot up electrical substations and try to knock out the power. The guilty pleas to the plot that was uncovered by federal prosecutors, those guilty pleas were earlier this year in federal court in Ohio. And now this weekend, here we are again. Moore County, North Carolina.
Shortly after 7 p.m., power outages began here in the Carthage area. Shortly thereafter, the outages would spread to the greater majority of central and southern Moore County. Upon the arrival of the power crews and our deputies, extensive damage was found at their substations. Evidence at the scene indicated that showed that the firearm had been used to disable the equipment.
Power out for what they call 45,000 customers. Customers in this case means 45,000 homes and businesses. Altogether, we're talking about over 100,000 people. Well, it was initially 45,000 customers, 45,000 homes and businesses. It's now down to 33,000 homes and businesses, but that's still tens of thousands of Americans tonight with zero power, zero. And this isn't like lines down in a storm that you go out and rewire the lines and put them back up. This is two electrical substations shot up with firearms, like in California in 2013, and like the neo-Nazis just pled guilty to planning in Ohio earlier this year. And we have nobody in custody, nobody claiming responsibility, no word on any potential motive, apparently no suspects. In Moore County, North Carolina this weekend, it was two different electrical substations, reportedly about 10 miles apart. The two of them reportedly shot at and disabled by gunfire within about 45 minutes of each other on Saturday night. As for the motive, we literally have no idea. And there has been a lot of speculation, both nationally and locally, since we learned that this happened, since we learned that this was a deliberately inflicted attack. But honestly, bottom line, we really do not know. At the first press conference yesterday, where the sheriff and local officials took the first questions about what had happened, they were immediately asked, and then asked repeatedly, whether this attack on the electrical infrastructure in North Carolina might be related to threats and intimidation that have been directed at local LGBTQ groups in Moore County recently, and in particular, at a drag show at a downtown venue in the town of Southern Pines, a show that started just minutes before the power stations were shot up and the lights went out. There were far-right, anti-gay, anti-trans protesters trying to shut down that Moore County event on Saturday, just hours before the power stations were shot up. This followed another similar protest by masked far-right paramilitary groups, including the Proud Boys, at an LGBTQ event last month in nearby Sanford, North Carolina, which is only about a half an hour away from Moore County. Vice News points out today that this was a whole weekend of menacing anti-gay, anti-trans protests in multiple places around the country, including Columbus, Ohio, where honestly it looked like a gun show on the street outside one gay and trans-friendly event with armed Proud Boys flashing white power signs and screaming at people, and a white supremacist group called Patriot Front showing up in formation, White Lives Matter guys doing Hitler salutes, random guys with no apparent affiliation just turning up in full camouflage military-style outfits with assault rifles. That was Columbus, Ohio this weekend. Lakeland, Florida had neo-Nazis this weekend outside a queer event, flying a big swastika flag. Neo-Nazi Holocaust deniers showed up to another queer event in New York City this weekend as well. So when Moore County, North Carolina was host this Saturday to another one of these far-right anti-gay, anti-trans protests, and then just as a local drag show that they were protesting started up, someone shot up the power stations and cut power to the whole county. Yes, understandably, people locally immediately started asking the sheriff if that was the reason why, if there was a connection. Now, the sheriff has said repeatedly that he has no idea if the attack on the power stations is linked to those anti-gay, anti-trans protests. There really is no indication either way. The sheriff says he has no idea about a motive of any kind, no suspects, nobody claiming responsibility, no one in custody.